Hi guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to do the Picot Bind Off for the Fisherman's Wife neck warmer. And the Picot Bind Off is just a way of binding off the work that leaves a nice pretty little, almost a scallop edge, but they're called picots. So I'm going to be showing you that method today. Okay, so at this point I've already basically completed the entire scarf. And I've gotten to the point where I've already created the buttonholes right there. It makes 3 buttonholes. And then the last repeat that I finished was a wrong side repeat, and that's right here in the directions. So right now we're on the right side of our work, so we're ready to perform that Picot Bind Off. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to be casting on a series of stitches, and then we're going to be binding those off along with our work. The stitch is already on our live needle. So I'll show you how we do this. In the instructions, first it says to knit 1. So we'll simply knit a stitch, pull that off the left-hand needle, and then in the instructions it says to place the stitch back onto the left needle. And by doing that, just place it right back on, slip it purlwise. Just as you see it on the right-hand needle, place it on the left-hand needle, and then cinch up your work. And next it says cable cast on 2 stitches. And the way you do a cable cast on, at the end of your needle here, you have 2 stitches. You're going to insert your right-hand needle through both those stitches. And you're not going to be going in the first stitch or the second stitch. You're simply going to be going in between both stitches, just like so. I'll kind of show you here. We're not catching any of our stitches there. We're just simply going in between the 2 stitches. Now we're going to yarn over our needle with our working yarn, pull through, and then instead of just placing that stitch directly on our left needle as we did the first time, we're going to twist that stitch and go in like so. And you're going to leave that working yarn nice and loose because we're going to go right back in the same way we did before a second time. Because remember, we're casting on 2 via the cable cast on. So we'll knit another stitch, pull through, and then twist it and pop it on the end of our needle. Now you can go ahead and cinch up your work a bit. Okay, so that is our cable cast on 2, and the way you know that you've performed this correctly is you'll see this big gap here in your work. And the first knit stitch that we placed back on our needle is this one right here, and we've cable cast on 2 stitches. So you'll have 3 stitches to the right of that big gap. So you know that you've cast it on 2 correctly. Now in the instructions it says next to bind off 4 stitches. So by doing that, you'll simply knit 1 stitch, second stitch, and now this is going to be our first bind off. Insert your needle in the second stitch and pass that over the first stitch. That's our first bind off. Knit your next stitch, slip that stitch over. There's our second bind off. Knit the next stitch, slip the stitch over. There's our third bind off. Knit the next stitch, pass over, and that's our 4th bind off. Okay, so we've bound off 4 stitches, as it says in the instructions, and then it wants us to repeat to the last stitch on our needle. So we'll be repeating between these 2 sets of brackets here. So by repeating, it says to place the stitch back onto the left needle. So again, when you're placing your stitches back, you're simply transferring them straight across, slipping purlwise. And then cable cast on 2 again. So again, it's these last 2 stitches on your left-hand needle. Insert your right-hand needle, knit a stitch, twist, and pop that onto your left-hand needle. Now how many have we cast on? We've only cast on 1. So we'll cast on our second stitch, twist, pop that on. And then by looking at that gap and the 3 stitches on the other side of the gap, we know we have our original knit stitch that was placed back on the needle and 2 cable cast on. So we know at this point that we've cast on 2. It's just a nice little reminder if this is the first time you're doing your cable cast on. So now we're going to bind off 4 again. So knit 2 to begin with, bind off a stitch, knit another, bind off a second stitch, knit, bind off a third stitch, knit, bind off a fourth stitch. And then again, we're repeating between these two brackets, so place stitch back on the left needle. And you'll get the rhythm of this as you go along. Now, cable cast on 2. So we'll just continue this way all across the stitches on our needle. And the pattern tells us to repeat to the last stitch. So as you're doing this method, you're going to get all the way to the end and you'll have one stitch left, and that's when we will perform this very last part that's not in our bracket. So I will meet you when we get to that last stitch. Okay, so we've bound off our last 4 stitches and we're down to the last stitch left on our left-hand needle. So in the instructions, it says to place the stitch from our right-hand needle onto our left-hand needle, cable cast on 2 stitches, then bind off 3. So we'll place this stitch, slip it onto the left-hand needle. Now we'll cable cast on 2 again as we did before. So knit a stitch, place that on the left-hand needle, and then cable cast on a second stitch. Place that on the left-hand needle. Okay? Now, after the cable cast on 2, it says bind off 3 stitches instead of the previous 4. So we'll bind off by knitting 2, slip that stitch over, that's bind off 1, knit, pass over, that's bind off 2, knit the last stitch, pass over, and that's our 3rd stitch bound off. And at this point, I usually just yarn over my needle, pass that through, that last stitch, pull that out, just leave ourselves a little bit of yarn for weaving in, and then pull that through our last stitch. So as you can see here, we have our nice little picots. And this should make 2, 4, 6, 8 little picot stitches on the end of your work. And if you take a look here, the way that you know that you've performed this correctly is you'll see this little gap here where our picot goes above. And you'll see a gap and then 2 stitches that are bound off, and then another gap, 2 knit stitches, a gap, 2 knit stitches, a gap, and it'll go like that all the way across the row. And at the end here, you'll have 1 knit stitch anchoring that little gap, just as there is 1 knit stitch anchoring the first gap in that before that picot. So that just gives you a nice finished look. You will want to block this just to make these picots lay nice and flat. You don't want them curling up so that you can see the back of the work. But to do that, just go ahead and soak your scarf in some nice warm water with just a little bit of conditioner or baby soap. Soak that for about 5 minutes, wring it out really good, and then you'll want to just pin these down on a blocking mat or a towel on an ironing board. And just by pinning those little picots down, it'll make them lay nice and flat. But that is how we perform the Picot Bind Off on the Fisherman's Wife neck warmer.